Today is October 22nd, 2019. This is the standard C++ lifecycle call. I will share my screen. So today I was hoping to divert from the normal course of
Is
business.
anybody here really good at GitHub filtering? I'm trying to figure out if there are any filters for closed PRs that are not merged.
Can folks hear me? Can somebody verify that they can hear me?
I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. Do you not hear me before?
Correct.
Nope. First time.
Oh, awkward. Okay. Yay, Linux is the new desktop. All right. So from last time, the plan of record is not to do a standard meeting. So the plan of record this time is to talk about the contributor summit. We should have, let me see. Yes, we have a decent critical mass here to talk about this. So the purpose of the contributor summit meeting is to talk about the roadmap for SIG cluster lifecycle more broadly across the different subprojects. And there's a doc linked at the top here, which says contributor summit, and here's some of the highlighted details. What I was hoping to do is talk more broadly with the larger SIG about some of the high-level roadmap items that folks wanted to talk about during that meeting, and also to basically try to vet or help solicit feedback upon some of your roadmap items to see if we can, try and create some synergy across the sub-projects too as well, for lack of a better term. So at the top of this was cluster add-ons. Lee or Justin, are there like roadmap items or high-level things that you wanted to try and sort of discuss during the contributor summit?
I think that we could pretty succinctly cover the two areas that we've made design and progress and consensus on in the add-on subproject. One being the use of operators to delegate specific logic and kind of the RBAC around that. And then we'd mention, that the candidates for the core add-ons that are basically useful for those. And then that we also are looking at a shared installation primitive that utilizes customize and provides an extension point for installers.
So are there other high-level items that you want to try to tackle in the next year? You wanted to do integration with kubeadm. You have a feature gate. Is the plan in the next year the roadmap to enable by default and possibly try to move out some of the core functionality?
That might be so. Mentioning that we would like to get rid of the hard-coded bits for core add-ons in kubeadm specifically is a sensible thing to say. As you kind of mentioned before, we want to be careful, like saying, "Oh, this is the approach we're going to take." But yeah, I would say getting user feedback is certainly a goal for that feature, and that we want to do something that's high quality. Sorry, let me help you up here.
So a question I have for this is, are we going to consider the kube proxy to be a add-on?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the more interesting ones to be able to disable, since some CNIs are now providing their own replacement for that component. So,
Yep. What other core componentry would you like to get rid of or modify?
I would this just as far as removals, that's pretty much the only thing kubedm actually installs, other than kubedns as an alternative.
Yeah, but that's kind of end of life. It's
Yeah,
been deprecated.
and then there's the additional, like, kind of icing on the cake use cases. So that would be CNI, supporting and installing optional CNI.
So Justin has his hand raised. Go ahead, Justin. It's kind of a smaller group.
Cool. I just wanted to say, like in the cops case, we have a bunch of stuff which I would say erroneously in retrospect built in, and we would like to, there is a lot of consensus, we would like to get that removed, with the use case being so that the life cycle is not bound to the cops life cycle. And it does seem like.
So what things though in particular?
Well, in cops land, we have all the CNI providers, Calico, Weave, KubeRouter, Cilium. We have this guy, AWS VPC CNI. Those are the big ones that like cause most of the churn for us. So that's our top priority.
Okay. So if I were to initial user feedback. Is this fairly succinct statement of the kind of the high level roadmap of what you kind of envision, at least with current resourcing of people who are engaged right now?
I definitely call out the cops one because I imagine we have, so I think what will happen is we have a bunch of these add-ons in cops, or whatever you want to call them in cops, and we will create operators for them, and then ideally those will then be reusable elsewhere, sort of fulfilling our first goal of sharing those so they're available everywhere.
Yeah, the excellent thing would be that we use the same API in a similar manner for listing what is installed, and that all of those operators are usable, really developed for COPS users on some of them, but then usable in kubedm.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that we don't develop it. We develop them for Kubernetes users in future, but yes.
So part of like this talk of the roadmap is to solicit people to get engaged, right, at the contributor summit. Like, what would be the call to action for folks who are going to be there? Why should they care?
If they're a COPS user, they should care because then they don't have to update. They have their add-ons get an independent lifecycle from COPS, so it's a better upgrade or lifecycle story. And if they are not a COPS user, it's that they have we're building this consistent add-on experience across the ecosystem.
I would also add that it's important to level the playing field for vendors and maintainers and other contributors and project owners in the ecosystem. If our core add-ons are baked into the installers, then that makes it difficult for other people to become part of folks' cluster bootstrap lifecycle, you know?
I'm going to ask you to try and reword that statement, because part of this is like we have a limited time to talk about each subproject.
Yeah.
And you want to make a pitch that's compelling or resonating to the audience, because it's fair that like we're going to have most of the SIG, or I would say a good chunk of the SIG that there, as well as a large swath of new contributors.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if we're going to make a compelling statement, you have to find a set of a set of words that will resonate with like both existing and new contributors.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it levels the playing field for add-ons. Yeah, cluster bootstrap.
All right, I have a very large swath of things for kubeADM. Cluster API. What do we want to talk here about immediate roadmap versus like long-term roadmap?
Well, the immediate roadmap is probably going to be all the recaps that we have out. So control plane, end-to-end test framework, cluster cutout redesign. What else is there? Machine pool. Control plane also includes control plane upgrades.
Image building?
That's a separate subproject now,
Oh, okay, right.
which we should call out. But long term, what do people want to see? Where do we want to drive the long term things? Do we want to say we want to try to make beta this year?
Is this year 2020?
Yes, the next year, I should say.
Maybe. We'll definitely need to figure out UX for, like, after cluster cutoff v2 is up and running, we'll probably go back and get more feedback. We'll need to come up with like a pulse survey, I guess, for just like get feedback on how people use and manage Kubernetes clusters in the wild, but also how the current users are using cluster API. And I guess just like automating more things, but I don't have like a clear idea yet now that we have like so many proposals open.
Well, just try to like get an eye towards the future, like, you know, and try to be some bold with some of the predictions, because, you know, driving towards beta, I think, is a reasonable expectation across the entire, I say driving towards beta. Driving. Yeah. Or definition of data.
Since, you know, today we have default implementations for the Bootstrap provider, I think it would be useful, you know, on the way to beta to either, you know, enable or basically see more implementations in the wild, and help those, you know, actually get built, or, you know, see if everybody is just happy using the default implementation.
I think it would be worthwhile seeing other providers out there. I believe Talos is a Bootstrap provider, so it'd be nice to check in with them and see how things are going. And then certainly with the control plane work that's going to ramp up soon once we get the proposal merged, that is a default opinionated combination of using the kubeADM bootstrapper with the control plane type. And I know there was some feedback in the CAP yesterday and today about how it looks like maybe we're so opinionated and the things are tied together that we're building in this modularity for no need. And I added a comment saying I don't think that it's that extreme, that there's still value, because we can swap things out still with our object references, and we have some, they're small, but we do have contracts for our machine bootstrap types and whatnot. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I'd love to see some more more providers that aren't just what we have right now.
So I think that's an important thing to highlight too, is that we need to improve the documentation and the explicitness of these contracts that we're defining compared to what we have today as well.
I think that work suits the testing framework fairly well. It's alluded to, but not explicitly added as the first version. Added in the first version.
But more broadly speaking, like if you had to shake your crystal ball, I'm taking Magic 8 Ball and crystal ball and kind of putting them together. If you were to shake your crystal ball and try to see into the future, like where ideally would you like to see some level of cluster API in the future?
So I think one of the big things for me is we need to define how different layers of the stack communicate amongst each other. So right now we don't have a way for the infrastructure provider to be able to inform things. So that leads to a lot of verbosity and poor UX in how we create and define things. So if we had ways for the different providers and pieces to communicate amongst each other somehow, that gives us the opportunity not only to simplify the UX, but it also enables us to unlock better workflows between the different components as well.
Should we have some like adoption type goals? Like, let's see COPS adopted. Let's see adoption of cluster CTL. Let's see it used by Azure and Amazon and Google, right? Something like that.
I think those are fine goals. Will Google?
If it's awesome, will it be awesome? Yeah, I honestly don't know.
I think one useful thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, well, one useful thing that we can do, regardless of whether it's adopted or not, we can always, get a list of, the blockers from, like, what would it take for, for Google to use this, concretely. Those would be good things to know and gather from various, vendors who maybe are using even V-Alpha 1 today, but are not updating.
Don't use V1 Alpha 1.
All right. So again, this is to solicit the initial conversation. If folks want to add details here, things they want to talk about, I'm going to assign a single person probably. Like this probably should have done that at the beginning, I guess. Lee, are you going to be at KubeCon?
Yep, I'll be there.
All right. So what I will do is I will work with the different people that will be there. I know, Vince, you're giving a talk, so you're going to be the public face of Cluster API, but we can have other people there too. So I'm going to kind of delegate you because you already have the talk.
Sounds good.
Is Moshe here? He is not. I don't necessarily want to be the talker on Image Builder. I could, if no one else wants to. I'm just going to say Fabrizio knows going to be there. Same reasoning, and it looks like you guys are ahead of the curve. So what's the call to action for Cluster API? What do we want? How do we want people to get engaged? How and where?
I think the biggest thing is we need signal. So we want people to try it out. We want people to tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, we'd like to know where they'd like to see it go and where are the gaps for what they need to do.
What else?
I think if we're looking at folks that would potentially be creating providers or building services on it, I think a good thing feedback would be is what are the barriers to adoption? I know we talked about a little bit with the adoption stuff, but you know, specific feedback around why are you not getting on board with Cluster API, or what problems you've encountered, that sort of thing.
I'm gonna give you a good-natured ribbing, Justin. What else?
One of the things that I don't see here that I've been, I guess talking about is that I mean, I see Cluster API. Tim, I think you've talked about this actually in publicly, that Cluster API is going to enable a set of higher level tooling that just can't exist today because there's not a common API, right? So people build these higher level tools internally, but it doesn't really make sense to share them because they're not portable. And so these things may exist, but they're closed source. Not a lot of collaboration happening. So if we can talk about, maybe give examples of what those kind of tools might look like, sort of inspire people, why they might want to use Cluster API as end users, build their project on top of Cluster API.
Liz, go ahead.
I think it's also good to sort of show Cluster API as an alternative to proprietary things that a lot of cloud providers have. Like, you can think of Cluster API in some senses, not all, as a alternative to defining all of your infrastructure as a CloudFormation template, for example, and that makes your infrastructure more portable.
So it's probably a good set of information. Again, if you have more ideas, feel free to add them. What I'm going to do from this document, I wanted to get started a little early because KubeCon will approach faster than we know it. Once I'll get a set of templates and slides in there with some of this initial data seeded inside of there, and then I'll hand it off to the individual stakeholders to refine those sets of slides. We can kind of work through it then. So image builder, we have a lot of people who part-time it here. Are there key roadmap items we want to see for image builder?
I think the big one would be start work towards deduping the different approaches that we have in repo today.
I would love to see some integration or pieces, lower the barrier to entry to build your own automation, right? Like, you can put the Jenkins YAML in there. You could build, Circle CI stuff, whatever. All these different CI systems have like some predefined set of goop that they require. So baking that into the repository so people can just build their own turnkey automation around it would be pretty useful.
I think another big one is going to be versioning of the tooling itself and figuring out how that aligns with the versioning of the projects that consume the images that it creates.
Do we want to do any image publishing, like as part of this project at any regular interval? Like, say for example, Kubernetes gets distributed for every major release, and we want to, should the image building project start to, like, every time a Kubernetes is built, should we publish some default images that just get used by everybody else, all the other sub projects?
This is where it gets a bit tricky, I think. So in an ideal world, yes, but with the time commitments that we have from the people that are involved, I don't think we have the ability to create supported images.
Oh, we're an open source project. There's no such thing as supported images.
I'm just saying, I don't think that we have the time commitments in place that we would be able to support actually addressing any type of CVE related issues in a reasonable amount of time. If we can keep it to these images are just for test demo purposes versus something that we actually expect people to consume, I think that's something that we can do and make sense, but without actually more dedicated people on the project or more time dedicated from the people that we have involved, I hesitate to say that, truly downstream consumable images.
I would never expect a person to consume a production grade downstream images generated by an open source project. That's like a recipe for disaster. So the call to action would be help with automation and testing. You'll use this no matter what. You would use this in any environment.
I think another one would be is helping identify gaps to adoption. Why are you using bespoke image building tooling instead of being able to consume this?
Just copy. We'll just have the same slide.
There better not be pictures of KubeCon, that's all I can say.
No pictures allowed.
Not of the YJSBY.
Any other things here? I don't actually see Fabrizio on the call, but I did see him editing this section note before.
I'm here.
You are? I don't see you on the list for some reason. Oh, there you are.
I'm in incognito.
Okay. You want to go through the roadmap items for next year?
Yes, I cleaned it up similar to the others. So simplify the day two operation. And we have some work for going from imperative to declarative. And this is a work where we would like help and feedback from the community. And also we would like to support new workflows, like change the cluster or certificate rotation. Then we want to make Kubernetes more friendly for higher level tools, allow easy vendoring of the configuration initially, and support machine readable output. Then we want to increase flexibility around add-ons and etcd by integrating with the two projects, allows to opt out from the default add-on list, opt in a custom add-on list, and possibly lower the barrier between local etcd and external etcd. Ideally, I would like to have a cluster that starts with local etcd at some point to pivot to an external etcd. This will be interesting. And then we have work to do around the component config management to better support component config management, and a lot of work to do for moving kubeadmin out of tree, get all the automation in place, get all the set up a new release cycle for kubeadmin and so on. Does this sound good?
Sounds good to me.
And I wrote down 3 call to action: help to make kubeadmin simpler, more extensible, and help to make kubeadmin the cornerstone for other installer. And then I left this section because when thinking back at this year, we had some lesson learned after GA. Kubeadmin kind of suffered a shrinking in the contributor base, and we spent a lot of work in setting up end-to-end test, which was interesting but not a fancy type of work. And so there are some good lessons learned to me in how to keep the community health around the project. I don't know if you want to share or discuss around this, we can do, or make it separately another point after all the project overview.
You're muted, Tim.
Man, I had a monologue and everything. I think we might want to combine the lessons learned, because there's a lot of things that apply to all of these projects. Some are specific, obviously, we can call them out specifically, but some of the other lessons learned I think are just generally good things to call out. Maybe we can have a lessons learned section sort of at the end, or maybe at the beginning. I don't know. What do folks think here? Should we have lessons learned for every sub-project, or should we have it all together at the end, or some of the retrospective in the beginning? Don't care.
Either way is probably fine.
I suspect that a lot of the lessons learned are duplicate between the projects as well. I think we're all learning the same painful lesson separately.
Yeah, I agree. So I think like maybe a retrospective at the beginning of the year before we get into the roadmap items sounds like, chronologically it makes a lot of sense.
I'm +1 for getting this at the beginning.
Okay. When I start to make slides, I will just kind of take some of this data and push it towards the top. And hopefully by the next SIG cluster lifecycle meeting, which I think will be right before KubeCon, we can actually go through the slides together and make sure we agree. All right. Thomas, Minikube stuffs.
Sure. So we accomplished a lot this year. You can read the painful, gory details there. I think the main thing when we look back a year ago, which is I guess about the time that I joined Minikube, right before last year. Hold on a second. We were very far behind in the release cycle for Kubernetes, and there was a lot of work to be done on documentation. But I guess more importantly, the lessons learned, like the lessons on my list are, I believe, probably very applicable to other projects. Documentation is pretty much everything for a successful adoption of an open source project. And what we really found was that great integrated documentation decreases the support burden for the engineers working on a project. If an error message directly points to a document, like here's how to solve something, you're less likely to have an issue to triage later. One of the things that we really learned was that for new issue reporters that if we point them directly to like a specific line of code that they are likely going to need to change to fix something, they are much more likely to go ahead and do it rather than if you say, yeah, this is a known issue and we'll get to it sometime. You know, if a lot of people just want to solve things themselves in this community, and it's a little bit more work for us as a maintainer to like find the actual line, but it really helps. I think one of the lessons was to embrace the competition and collaboration. I know there's certainly competing projects in this space, and I think we've actually gone a long way with discussing things with other project leads and finding out like best practices for improving performance, or you know, how we can make things more maintainable. And I feel like we've all learned from each other. One of the big lessons is that users really care about performance, much more than I anticipated. You know, once you solve like the robustness aspect, the number one feature that users ask us for is better performance. So users really care, and that's something that we're focusing on. So for 2020, we've got a bunch of kind of a grab bag of user friendliness and performance items. One of them is having a graphical interface specifically for Mac and Windows users, like a little menu bar tray to suspend and resume clusters, to start new clusters, get alerts when you're running out of resources. That's actually like one of the number one issues that users have with Minikube once they have a successful cluster, is that they load it with more resources than the VM can possibly handle. And because once someone runs Minikube start, we basically hand off and say everything else from here on out is kubectl. There's no notification for users to see that they're actually out of resources, that their pods are stuck because they're out of disk space, out of memory. So we're basically going to aim for a background daemon that monitors the health of the cluster and then gives an alert to this UI. A lot of the other stuff is just keeping up with Kubernetes features and changes in the systems landscape. One of the things that is on here that is certainly applicable for, say, cluster lifecycle is figuring out how to replace our add-ons with something more maintainable. You know, we have this idea of like a third-party marketplace for like if you want to set up Helm or set up some other like service running in your cluster. And right now it's kind of, we're using the Kube add-on manager, and it's kind of painful that people can't just take like their kubectl YAML, their deployment YAML, and just throw it in. People have to like manually make this add-on, and there's no hints as far as like the resource usage of this service. So there's room to do something better here, and I would love to hear what ideas people have in that space. So, yeah.
Cool. I still have like this weird heebie-jeebies about UIs because there's so many. And
Yeah.
It's like a pitfall of doom.
Yeah. It's an optional thing. If people want a UI, they can use a UI. We're trying to keep the scope very low to just a menu bar item to stop and start and get alerts.
That's actually pretty good to know. Cool. I don't really have a lot of questions on this one or any comments. I think people are working ahead of me now. So Justin, did you want to talk about some of the details here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we talked about our roadmap in a COPS meeting, I guess, probably 10 days ago now or whatever. And these are the things which we talked about for our roadmap, which you're scrolling away from me, so I got to split. We're basically pretty soon we want to get our first add-on operators going, like some work on security around kubelet bootstrap and around the CIS benchmark. getting cluster API support, and Containerd is actually being driven more by security than anything else, just because Docker security tends to be a problem for us because we sort of take control of Docker and therefore responsibility for it. Also, a lot of work on docs. I think we are finally going to get a real docs site, which will be a big change. I can't believe you're stealing my thunder with that beautiful dog. Then that's sort of what we're aiming for 117. And so 117 cluster API would be just for nodes probably, and then 118 would be a more full support for cluster API. Because 117 is, as you say, like KubeCon, approaching rapidly. And then I put on a couple of calls to action there for like why people should get involved. One of the problems we have is COPS has all these configuration, because COPS does things like manage CNI and has all these different configuration options. We now have so many configurations that like it's not clear which one of those work really well and which one of those work less well. Which ones of those work less well. So like help us figure out which configurations are important to the community, and if one of those is important to you, then like basically adopt it, help with docs, and then get involved with sort of milestone items.
So the one common theme that keeps on coming up here is that docs, and docs. There's a couple common themes, but that's the one that's really resonating with me. Is like, should we form like a small little working group amongst ourselves to try and like unify, clean up, set up like these best practices, kind of help us to curate our docs? Because right now there's kind of a mixture across the subprojects of how we maintain them, how we curate them. Like I know the kubeadm subproject had a lot of back and forth with the docs maintainers of the Hugo website, and it's very frustrating. And maybe if we had a set of best practices that we all kind of agree to, we can just, it just helps to ease the cognitive burden of trying to each maintain our own thing.
I'd certainly love a great recommendation. I think we're going to copy cluster API, I think. But yeah, that's the other way to do things, right? It's just we all copy each other.
Yeah, but I mean, if we think about it up front, like there are ways to structure documentation that are generally more beneficial to ease the first, the day one operation and user experience there. So.
We could also, as a group, provide feedback to, I guess, the docs SIG. So right now, we're sort of handling our cluster API, for example, right, is handling docs on its own. It seems to be working pretty well. Maybe some of that would actually be useful knowledge for the docs SIG.
Yeah, you know what I think we might do is maybe I'll open up an issue in the community repo. We can curate like a best practices doc for the SIG in general. So as subprojects come and go, we have a set of best practices where we outline, here are the docs tools that we found that work the best. You can choose your own, but this is the path that has the most mind share, at least for the time being. I could take that as an action item. All right. Daniel, are you going to be at KubeCon?
I'll be at the Contributor Summit.
Right. You want to walk through?
Sure. Yeah, we got together, talked about this with Justin last week. I don't have any summary for the call to action, but do you mind scrolling? Or I can switch to my doc, but I was looking at your okay. The roadmap. Some basic ways to improve the user experience. First, by defining the API types, and then reading configuration from a file. So I guess another way of saying that is declaratively, a declarative experience for etcd-ADM, as opposed to the imperative of I guess partially declarative one, as opposed to the completely imperative one with flags that we have now. Also really important is to figure out how to work well with cluster API. I think etcd-adm fits well for the external etcd use case that exists today. So if people have if people want to use external etcd, we should make sure that etcd-adm is the tool that they want to use for that. And of course, also work, as Fabrizio was saying earlier, work well with kubeadm, and figure out how how to support what kubeadm does with etcd, or what the default implementation wants from etcd or from etcd-admin. And then a few, I think, low-hanging fruit one would be to implement a backup restore functionality. This is really important in production, and it etcd-adm here could solve kind of the problem of using lots of different sort of sinks and sources for I guess targets for backups. So if we have that, then users ideally would just be able to configure, hey, here's my S3 bucket, or here's some NTFS NFS mount, things like that. And we wouldn't, this wouldn't be running as a service in the background at first, but we could give an example of how to sort of easily, make a cron job, for example, with etcd-adm, or maybe even a daemon set that runs etcd-adm to take a backup. And then the bigger items would be to implement the self-driving functionality. So to have a service that supervises an etcd cluster, and that works without, for example, the presence of a cluster API management plane. And then also to support and just take advantage of the non-voting members functionality. That's going to improve etcd usability and overall. And so we do want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that.
So I do have how has the subproject been with regards to attendance of new contributors and whatnot?
Not good. I think there are definitely people using the project, submitting issues, submitting PRs occasionally, but I think it would be to the benefit of the project to try to grow that group.
So what would be because up above, there's different calls to action about things that either we want other people to engage in, or general themes of that we need to address. So what are the key things that you want to see people engage with? And it sounds like growing the contributor base is one of them, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that would be very important. Growing the contributor base and making it easier to contribute, but also I think there's probably a documentation issue with etcd-adm as well. Although it's not a complicated user experience. We don't have a docs site. It's kind of README and the sort of usage, basic usage information. So improving on that, probably make it clearer how to take advantage of etcd-adm, why somebody would want to use it.
So I think one of the key things that I'm going to talk with every single person on this is try to sell the subproject of the why, right? Start with why in the slides. Like, why do these subprojects exist? What is the theme or the central tenet of why, and why does it matter to the people who are attending this talk? So I think I'll do that with every one of these slides. Is like every subproject will get a why section. Like, you know, what is your purpose? I pass butter, you know, slide to outline, you know, what it is that you do around here, and why does it matter to, why would you want to contribute, and why does it matter to a person who's attending this talk? Why you should care. So this is good content. I think this is probably more than enough to keep us busy for during the contributor summit. The question I have for the larger group is I need help to help create these slides and curate this content. Are there folks, I'm gonna call on each sub-project person to own their section, obviously. But the overall, is there somebody who can help contribute with the overall deck and the flow of the talk?
I can help you with that, Tim.
I can help too.
I'm also happy to help. I think we had a good community update slide, which has been passed around a bit about like how they all fit together, which I think would help. Or how all the subprojects fit together, which I think we could like get the same idea on, right? So it's not like 6 disjoint talks. It's like this is the big picture, and then here's the details.
Yeah, it's the Voltron moment.
Okay.
But with less dead cats. Right? All right, so somebody has to turn that into a meme. I think this is enough content right now. The next step is I'll try to get the templates from either the website. I think they have them uploaded now, and try to get this started and stubbed out. And then I will reach out to content owners over the next 2 weeks to try and fill in their sections where possible. We only got 5 minutes left. Are there other things or topics that folks wanted to discuss while we have everybody together?
So Tim, you mentioned template real quick. Did you mean the KubeCon template? Because I don't think there is currently a contributor summit template, but the content team is talking about that now. So if that comes to fruition, I'll make sure to follow back with you.
Yeah, I need a template. Otherwise, we can use the other contributor summit template that we had from last time. You could do that too. Any other topics? Going once, twice, 3 times.
Can we see your dog, please?
My dog. One more time. Oh, no, she's running away from me. So no, you can't.
Okay. Doesn't want to be put on YouTube.
No, she doesn't not want to. Well, now she comes back up. She thinks we're playing a game now. So no. Maybe next time.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Right?
Bye bye.